Hello, my name is Lori, and today's topic of local history is the American Civil War and the role that Lawrence County played. And it played a big role. Keep in mind, Lawrence County was in a very weird situation. Were bordered by two slave states, Kentucky and Virginia. Keep in mind, West Virginia didn't even exist until 1863. Now, both of the Virginia, of course, seceded. Kentucky became a border state and did not. But that did not mean that there was an easy time period. And prior to the Civil War, there was the Underground Railroad that was very active in Lawrence County. Ironton itself, as well as Burlington, was used to transport a lot of slaves from Kentucky through our county up north and into safety into Canada. And that will be a topic for another day. But the first documented mention of the war in Lawrence County began before the war even started, and that was on February 9th, 1860. And on that date, J.W. Dolphin, a local photographer, placed an advertisement in the Ironton newspaper stating, "Get your pictures made before the dissolution of the Union." Keep in mind, pictures were in their infancy at the time. They were just now developing the most effective, cheapest form, the tintype. A lot of these tintypes still exist, and the Civil War was one of the most photographed wars, one of the first ones of any kind. It's well documented, and photographers went to the battles. They went into the camps. So a lot of people got pictures of their soldiers and their sons and their fathers, husbands that went off to war. So there was a lot of pictures from this time period. On January 1st, 1861, the Union flagpole was raised in front of Ironton House with a 33-gun salute. The Ironton House was the first hotel that was established in Ironton. And this was to state where Ironton and Lawrence County stood when it came to the issue of secession. Keep in mind, they had not seceded necessarily at that time. 4 Irontonians even had the special honor of attending the inauguration of President Abraham Lincoln on March 4th, 1861. Just a little over a month later, on April 14th, 1861, President Lincoln called for troops, and immediately 3 companies were formed in Lawrence County. Each company consisted of 80 men. And at the time, they really thought the war would be quick and fast. North and South believed 3 months would be the most it would take, that one side or the other would give in. And so the first enlistment of soldiers was for 3 months on both sides. But it was very quickly realized that 3 months wasn't going to happen. And less than 4 months later, on August 2nd, 1861, the first Irontonian gave his life in the Civil War. His name was Richard Lambert. He was killed at the Battle of Scary in western Virginia, what we would now call West Virginia. He left behind a wife and a child. By September 4th, 1861, 1,210 Lawrence County men joined the Union Army to fight. A cannon named Dr. Trimble was fired every time the residents heard of a Union victory. Widows, wives, parents, and children of soldiers united to help the soldiers to create a relief committee. One job performed by the relief committee was to take food to soldiers in hospitals in Ashland, Kentucky. You also found local people creating bandages, wrapping up, tearing up, getting supplies. I know one time they were talking about tearing up sheets to roll bandages and different things to provide help for our soldiers. And keep in mind too, they also may have provided socks and clothing. Not every person got a uniform, and those uniforms took a lot of beating during the battles. In 1862, Dr. Jonathan Morris returned to Lawrence County. Morris had been captured in Guyandotte, West Virginia, when Ironton troops, Guyandotte, Virginia, now we call it West Virginia, when Ironton troops went to stop the rebels from burning the city down. He was held prisoner for 4 months in a rebel prison in Richmond, Virginia, and when he returned home, he gave lectures about his experiences. On July 12, 1863, the residents of Lawrence County heard the worst news that they had heard since the secession of the states and the creation of the Confederacy. The Morgan's rebel raiders were coming to the area. Now, Morgan's raiders were a group of guerrilla fighters. There was lots of them throughout West Virginia and Kentucky. Basically, what these people did is they attacked, in this case, anyone who were sympathetic to the Union. There were also people who were Union sympathizers who also would attack people who supported the Confederacy. That was more common in West Virginia and Kentucky. That is why there were some really major hard feelings that developed, and it even contributed to the Hatfield-McCoy feud. For Lawrence County, the Morgan Raiders were like the boogeyman was coming. These people were known to steal anything they could to use to help the troops. They kind of terrorized the local residents. And for Ironton, Lawrence County, the businesses closed. Everyone rushed home to safety. And for 10 days, men, those who had been left home, who were either too old or too young to fight or too injured, guarded the town of Ironton for 24 hours a day with no rest. As luck would have it, there is no proof, they never entered Ironton. There is stories and some proof that they did go through Lawrence County, but they did not remain in Lawrence County, and thankfully damaged very little when they went through. When I was a little girl, my grandma Schaefer would tell me a story as we were going out to look at the different to place flowers on the graves in the cemeteries. She would always point out this little creek, and she said, "That's where the Morgan Raiders crossed. That's where they camped." So there's a lot of older people in the community who still talk about when the Morgan's Raiders came through Lawrence County. In 1864, Colonel William H. Powell returned home. Now, poor Morris, like Dr. Jonathan Morris, Powell became a prisoner of the rebels. And unfortunately for him, he ended up in Libby Prison for 6 months. The Libby Prison was well known for its harsh treatment of the Union soldiers They were not as bad as Andersonville, but it wasn't much of an improvement. A lot of the problem with prisons at the time period is once we stopped trading officers back and forth, they were stuck in prisons on both sides that were never meant to hold that many people. Libby Prison was an example. And then you also have the tyrants that would take over these prisons, and just all the anger and frustration that they had over the war and what was going on would be taken out on the innocent prisoners, but on the prisoners themselves. The conditions were horrible. When it comes to our iron furnaces, they were producing iron, of course, to be used for the war effort. The war effort. Heckler Furnace was one of those. It was very active. The furnace is responsible for producing the iron for the Swamp Angel, which I hope to talk about later. But for a little bit of information on it, the Swamp Angel was a 16,700-pound Parrott rifle. Now, what we call a cannon, they called rifles during the time period. The cannons that you see in Woodland are actually Parrott rifles. Like I said, what we know, I would say cannon, but officially they're called rifles. And that was because they had rifling inside the bore of their. And the Swamp Angel was actually made at New York State's West Point Foundry. The cannon had an 8-inch diameter bore and was an 11-foot bore depth, and a 17-pound powder charge. It was capable of firing 200-pound projectiles over 7,000 yards. So quite an impressive cannon. Rifle. As you can see, I even make the mistake myself. It was used and unfortunately did not survive the Civil War. But like I said, there's a difference. There's more to that story, and hopefully I will tell you more about it later. In 1865, the Ladies' Aid sold 94 cakes to raise money for relief. Each cake was sold for $1, and eventually the Ladies' Aid raised $435. Now, the Ladies' Aids were important during the Civil War and all of our wars. They helped supply food and supplies for the troops. They also helped with the hospitals and medical supplies as much as they could. On March 25th, 1865, the entire town of Ironton was swarmed to the riverbanks to witness a momentous occasion. Sherman's army was aboard a Mississippi transfer boats when they floated up the Ohio River. When Lee surrendered, it was welcome news. The cannons were fired to celebrate. Church bells rang for the occasion. Ironton had sent 507 men to fight in the Union Army. Lawrence County ended up sending 2,747 men. That would be 12% of the total population of the county. Sadly, we did lose quite a few people. And for those of you who are interested in the Civil War, there are quite a few different books out there on the Civil War in general. There is a special section in Woodland. As soon as you enter Woodland, just off to your right is the GAR section. That stands for the Grand Army of the Republic. And that is where the Union soldiers and those who had served are buried. Not all of them, but quite a few of them. And I hope you enjoyed this story. And I will come back and tell you some more tales later. See ya.